Hello everyone, this is Amir from Audio Science Review. I thought I'd do a video on a topic that was requested a while back on balanced audio. It's one of those confusing topics, somewhat technical, and my goal in this video is actually to not get too technical, but clarify what we mean by balanced audio and some of the misconceptions that are out there. Turns out there are different things people calling balanced. There is balanced input to an audio device. There's balanced topology inside an audio device, and there is balanced headphone connection. There are three separate things. Let me pull up this Topping A90, which is a headphone amplifier, because it has 2 out of 3 in here that we could talk about. If you look in here, there are two sets of connectors on this headphone amplifier. We have the traditional RCA connections that we all hopefully are familiar with, but we also have XLR connections, and you can bring in XLR connections and these two female connectors, and then two male connectors are pass-through in this case. If you use headphones, you don't use these, but if you use it as a preamplifier, you would. So in this case, we call this balanced because the difference between that and the RCA is that the RCA uses this outside chassis as the reference. So the signal varies relative to this outside chassis. And as I explained in previous videos, when you do that, the mains ground over here, the safety ground, can cause current leakage between two pieces of equipment that are mains powered. And they can actually travel over this shield or the outside pin of the outside connection of RCA. And if it's loud enough, it'll cause the classic hum and buzz that you hear when you have what is called a ground loop. The XLR connections, on the other hand, don't use the chassis as a reference. They use two wires, and those two wires provide the signal, and therefore, no matter what is happening between, as far as, current flow between the equipment or voltage differential between the two pieces of equipment as safety ground, and it won't make a difference to your signal. So it provides great immunity to hum and buzz. A lot of people talk about, you only need these connections if you've got a studio or long connections, and consumers never have long connections, so you don't need this. That's not the reason I like to recommend them. I like to recommend them because they completely eliminate this issue with ground loops in, I shouldn't say completely, 99% of the time it'll eliminate the issue with ground loops. And in the old days, we didn't have much of a problem with ground loops. We had them occasionally, but not all the time. Today, we have it for two reasons. One is that when we use PCs, then we wind up with this long chain of ground that goes through a USB cable, for example, to a DAC, then to this one. And there's so many different voltage differentials that you can get in ground loops. And once you get hit with a ground loop, boy, I tell you, it's pain in the neck to solve it after the fact. So if you got a device that doesn't have balanced input, your options are very limited in solving your problem. But if you start with balanced, turns out you basically, have, insurance policy against ground loops. So even though your connection may be very short, even a few inches, I highly recommend, if you can afford it, these devices tend to be more expensive and have balanced interconnects because of connectors and the circuitry inside, the circuits inside. And but if you can, get the balanced version of everything. I think you can get balanced DACs now for $150 versus unbalanced or $100. So for extra $50 on the DAC, you have both outputs and you can choose as you need it. These balance signals, they're called balanced because the two inputs that, the two pins that bring the signal usually put on twisted pair wire and come in. And therefore, because the amplifier in there would only amplify the difference between these two, is very immune to what we call common mode noise. So if radiations or interference or something hit these two wires, as long as the signal, the interference couples to both of the pins equally, it gets filtered out. It only cares about what's different between these two pins. So as a convention, the driving mechanism for balanced signal is also what is called differential, meaning that these two pins, they don't swing between 0 and positive, but they also swing negative to 0 and then positive. So And that usually means that you get double the voltage on a balanced interconnect versus unbalanced. So traditionally on a desktop product, a DAC that only has RCA output puts out only 2 volts. But if you use XLR, it gives you 4 volts. And that can be an advantage also as far as, if you have longer lengths, or, you can also get better dynamic range on this thing. So, but just know that at high level, balanced is a good thing to guard against ground loops. And if you have the option, it's a good thing to use. Now, some people then talk about, okay, is the circuitry inside is also balanced or, differential inside? My advice to you is not to get wrapped around the axle on that one at all. Why do we care? The benefit of balance, as I mentioned, it comes in over the wiring and external world. Internally, whether it has a benefit or not is up to the designer to choose. It does make things more expensive. It makes it insanely more expensive with things like tube amplifiers. In general, to me, it's basically none of my business if it's balanced or not. A lot of people complain and say, oh, internally this is not balanced, therefore it doesn't matter. No, it absolutely does, because these receivers are balanced, and that's all you want to avoid ground loop. Whether the circuits are inside or balanced or not, we're going to measure it, and the measurements will tell us if they got better fidelity. If they didn't get better fidelity, I don't care if they use balance or not, and vice versa. If the fidelity is superb, what do I care about the internal topology of this thing? It's like worrying about what the nuts and bolts are inside your engine. You care about the horsepower and performance. Okay, so those are the inputs on this thing, and these inputs are available on preamplifiers, power amplifiers, in this case, headphone amplifiers, audio interfaces, professional interfaces. So remember, this is an input benefit. So just, from point of view, keeping it separate from other things I'm going to talk about. So inputs are in here balanced. You want balance if you can get them. What's inside, you don't care. Now, in case of headphone amplifiers, the industries really screwed things up in that they went out and invented, so in here we have a 1/4-inch jack, which is the classic headphone jack that you would have. It's got 3 pins on it. Now, a headphone actually has 2 cups in it. There's 2 little speakers in it. So each one of these has 2 wires. So total is 4 wires. How did you get 3 wires? Well, they take the negatives of the 2 drivers and tie them together to save on wiring and the pins on this. And the 2 positives is what the other 2 pins are. So you wind up with 3 pins. If you have that, this is called unbalanced, or the traditional output. And it comes in both 1/4-inch and 3.5 millimeter versions that, on portable device. And there's a mishmash out there of what headphones have what, and so you wind up having adapters and all this stuff. So from convenience point of view, look at what you're buying as far as headphones and amplifiers to decide. But this is the standard 3-pin output. Whenever you see 3-pin is what they call unbalanced. Now, some people started inventing the notion of a balanced connection, and I'll show you an example of that on this drop Ether CX headphone. And you can see it's a form of a sort of XLR type of connector. So very robust, and that's good. It comes with 4 pins, however, not 3. What have they done? They simply brought out the 2 pins from each side independently. They did not join the negatives together. What that means is that you can drive both cups independent of each other. Importantly, because the negatives are no longer attached together, you can use differential signaling to pump twice as much voltage over this than you can with the 3-pin. So instead of 0 to 2 volts, you can go from -2 to +2. So you have 4 volts differential, let's say, instead of 2 volts. Power is equal to voltage squared times divided by the impedance. So if you double the voltage, you can actually get quadruple the power. Okay, so in theory, you could transmit more power if you're not limited by the 3-pin connection that in the older ones, by decoupling the 2 channels independently. Now, that is called differential signaling or differential drive. It has nothing to do with the word balanced. Whoever coined that term the first time didn't understand what balance means. Headphones, by definition, are always balanced. There are 2 pins for each one of these, and they're floating in air. They're not connected to the chassis, they're not connected to ground, so there never was an unbalanced connection. So even the older ones were never unbalanced. It's just that they had one common pin, so you couldn't drive them differentially. If all this is too complicated, don't worry. It nets out to the fact that if you have a balanced connection and have an amplifier, headphone amplifier that has the mating connection in here, the amplifier can choose to send twice as much power into, twice as much voltage really, into the headphone as it can with 1/4 inch output. Now, you should know that some headphone amplifiers, small percentage of them, have these kinds of connectors for convenience only. They will put out the same voltage that they do on their 1/4 inch. No difference. In this case, I'll show you the measurements in a second, it actually is producing more voltage in here. But just know that you can't automatically assume that if you see XLR connection on this thing, or a balanced connection as it's called, that you have double the voltage available. Now, some people originally thought the benefit of that output was that by separating the negatives in the 2 cups, that you get better crosstalk, the better separation between the 2 cups. It's a total non-issue. We don't need a ton of crosstalk to get channel separation in 2 cups. 3 wires are already plenty good. We don't need that separation. I've never seen anybody prove that you actually do get better separation. I plan on testing that at some point, but for now, get that out of your vocabulary that you get better channel separation and better crosstalk. It's just not an important thing at all. The benefit, if it exists, means more power or convenience. Now, many headphones can be converted to balance if they come unbalanced. If they have a removable wire cable, and in this case, you're sort of stuck in this AKG K371 because it only has 1 wire. So you can't, unless this is 4-pin, which I don't remember if it is, you can't modify this. But some other headphones, you can actually, like this one, you can see that you can disconnect these and get aftermarket cables. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, you get gouged to death when you get balanced cables. They can be $40, $60, $80, $100 for those cables. And when they come with specialized connectors, usually you can't, sometimes you can't make your own either. So it's a bit of an annoyance. It's a complete mess. It's more of a mess than even I've talked about, because it's not just XLR, but they come in multiple connectors. This is a 4.4 millimeter, and it's actually also balanced. Again, typically is balanced. It also comes in 2.5 millimeter, very skinny, skinnier than 3.5 millimeter. It's even skinnier than this, which is suitable for portable devices, although very fragile connector. And that also provides, for balanced output if the amplifier can produce it. So with that, why don't we switch to a review of this product, so maybe you can see the pictures better than I was showing you here. So again, this is the device in here, the Topping A90. You see the 4-pin XLR differential output, although everybody calls it balance, and I've started calling it balance because I got tired of just calling it differential and people wouldn't know what I'm talking about. So you can see the word balanced written over here. So both of these are balanced outputs. And then you have, it's a single-ended or SE as a traditional 1/4 inch. And if you have 3.5 millimeter, then you need one of these adapters to go from 3.5 to 1/4 inch. And this is the back, as I mentioned. These are the input side XLRs, which have nothing to do with the output side. You could have RCA inputs over here and have balanced output for headphones. There is nothing tying these two together. Each one of them you have to look at independently, whether you have that or don't have it. So this one is a state-of-the-art device. That's why I use it for all my headphone testing. It has tremendous amount of power. Its distortion is less than 140 dB, which is like 25 dB below threshold of hearing. Just incredibly good. I'm not going to get into how good it is, but you could read the review. You can see its noise floor is just amazing. It's instrument class noise floor. better than 21 bits. And it's hard to get anything better than 21, and we have it here. It ranked at the time I was testing, and I think it's still so, as far as noise floor, is so low that even if you use a sensitive IEM, it's still, has basically dead silent background, and it's the best I've measured. But the reason I wanted to bring you here was to look at balanced versus unbalanced. So if you look at 33 ohm load, it puts out 2 watts of power using its quarter range unbalanced output. But when I switch to the balanced output, the impedance changed to 50 ohm, so the number's not going to be 4-to-1. But notice that it actually produces almost 5 watts of power. Why? Because again, in a differential output mode for a headphone, is able to use plus or minus swings, so it doubled the voltage, and therefore it can potentially get quadruple amount of power. And that's what you see in here. Now, do you need this? You may not. If you look at the headphone measurements I do, and I can quickly go up here and show you Focal Utopia that I just reviewed. If you go in here, I produce this graph in here that tells you how inefficient or efficient your headphone is. In case of this Focal Utopia, is extremely, it's very efficient. So for this one, you don't need balanced output, it's plenty loud. But if you have this Hi-Fi Man HE6 or, the Bear Dynamic DT 990, these Abyss headphones, this headphone, these things most definitely require balanced input to pump out enough voltage. Now, there are some crazy output single-ended headphones. Topping actually has one, I forget the model number that they recently released, and it puts out tremendous amount of power using single-ended. If that's the case, then you don't need balanced output. Remember, that's all that it's used for when it comes to headphone amplifiers. It's just more power. If you don't need it because your headphones are already efficient, or because the single-ended output is just so powerful anyway, like in this case, I'm getting, over 2 watts at 33 ohms and about 0.2 watts at 300 ohm. If you don't need it more than this, then great, you already have what you want. So doesn't mean that you should rush out and get something with balanced output. A lot of people say, should I upgrade to balance? I'm like, is your headphone loud enough? They're like, yeah, I guess pretty loud. If it's getting loud and it's not getting distorted, you all set. Now, from longevity point of view, if you got the money, go buy a headphone amplifier that is like this, basically. You have balanced input, so you have noise immunity for ground loops, and you have balanced output, which means that any kind of headphone you buy is going to be efficient enough. So, because you never know if you're operating down here and all of a sudden you read a review of a headphone, you jump at it and buy it and bring it home and connect it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to crank it all the way to the max. And when I do that, it's getting distorted or just doesn't get loud enough. Then, you're sort of stuck. So best of all worlds is balanced input, balanced output, but, this will cost you, unfortunately. So let's look at what the A90 cost. $500. Now, these prices have gone up because of COVID and shipping restrictions between US and Asia. And so hopefully over time, year or two, we'll see these go back down a little bit. But for now, yeah, it does cost money. On portable devices and phones and otherwise, when you get to 300 ohms with a high impedance load, voltage is everything. To increase this number, you need voltage. Current is not that important. And differential output, like I said, it doubles this voltage. So it's very much needed on many devices that are anemic otherwise. I've tested little dongles that most phones only put out 1 volt. Good dongles put out 2 volts, but the ones that do balance actually put out 4 volts. So again, that enables them to have 4 times the power, the voltage, and in theory, 4 times the power coming out of them. So it's a good thing to have, if you got power hungry headphones. If you have efficient headphones and forever you're going to stick with them, then single-ended is fine. So remember, to summarize, there's 2 different concepts in here. We have inputs and, which is only needed for noise immunity, and then the output is needed for power, and then sometimes with just compatibility, because your headphone vendor assume that you know, they're going to ship you balanced ones. And if you don't have that, you can get adapters, by the way. They're $20-$30. I've got adapters from everything to everything because you're going to need it. So you can take a balanced headphone, by the way, plug in an adapter, go unbalanced, and connect to this. So don't worry if your headphone comes balanced. Excuse me, with balance, you could just short out the 2 pins, the 2 negatives, and get 3 pins out of it. The inverse, you can't do with an adapter. You have to get all new cords because the wires are already shorted out at the beginning and you can't separate them back out. Okay, so hopefully you found this useful and practical. I know it's a little bit theoretical, but you know, if you're into headphones and everything, you need to know this. And if you're into audio in general, I recommend that you do look at getting balanced inputs and outputs on your devices if you can. Okay, thanks for watching and see you in a future video. Bye-bye.